The Competition Commission is unveiling its first ever Economy Concentration Tracker report. The report will be handed over to the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Ibrahim Patel. Themed Measuring Concentration and Participation in the South African Economy, Levels and Trends. The report details the levels of concentration and participation in 178 markets and how these have been evolving over the past 5 to 10 years. Let's take you live to that.
We are holding this media conference, Minister, just a few days after the World Competition Day, which we celebrated on Sunday. It is quite an exciting thing to us because the issues that we're going to be dealing with today are issues really that deal with the work that the competition a global village would have to deal with. And at this juncture, the Competition Commissioner, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonakele, is sitting on my immediate right, is joined by the competition's ever hardworking chief economist, Mr. James Hodge, who is sitting on my far right. Commissioner Bonakele has sanctioned this media briefing for two reasons. And one reason, members of the media and the minister, is that of unveiling the first ever economic concentration report in South Africa and to hand over officially this report to the Honorable Minister, who is the executive authority responsible for competition matters in cabinet. The report essentially details the state of concentration in South Africa, and it focuses on levels and trends of ownership and control of various sectors in the South African economy. But also, we are alive to the fact that at the time of the release of this report, Honorable Minister, not even a single historically disadvantaged person or groups own or control more than 50% of one economic sector in South Africa, which proves that indeed the levels of inequality, concentration, and skewed levels of ownership and control in our economy continue to grow. Members of the media, I'm a layman on these matters, and I now wish to invite to the fore the Competition Commissioner of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Thembinkosi Bonakele, to give us a full account of the state of concentration and participation in the South African economy. Commissioner Bonakele, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Sia. Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Ibrahim Patel. My fellow leaders from the Competition Commission, particularly our members of EXCO, senior officials from government, including the DTIC, as well as sister departments in the economic cluster, the GCIS, members of the media. Last time we were here, we were announcing the settlement with Vodacom and MTN following a market inquiry that we did. Soon thereafter, Minister, the country was locked down. So I'm not making any prediction. But I was reminded that we didn't have long after that historic announcement, which of course was very timely from the point of view of connectivity and access to communication means, because it became essential during lockdown that everybody could be connected. So we're very proud of that achievement, despite the unfortunate coincidence. South Africa's young democracy is alive to the increasing levels of inequality and slow economic growth, whilst navigating economic recovery during the state of a world pandemic. These are among many of the challenges facing South Africa's economy today. The country's economic levels and trends remain skewed as it doesn't reflect the demographics of South Africa's populace. A growing body of international work has highlighted concerning increases in the concentration in many of the leading global economies over the past 10 to 15 years. Whilst concentration may not necessarily always be bad, that narrative has sought to differentiate between efficient periods of growing concentration and inefficient periods. Generally, efficient periods of growing concentration are associated with tougher price competition, investment, and increasing productivity of leaders, which results in growing shares for efficient leading firms, but which occur of low levels of concentration to begin with. Honorable Minister, inefficient concentration growth occurs where there are entrenched leaders, resulting in lower levels of competition and higher entry barriers, and where concentration is associated with lower investments, higher prices, and lower productivity growth. US studies have also associated recent increased concentration with a lower labor share of GDP, contributing to wealth inequality as the rewards of capital outstrip those of labor. In his thought-provoking article themed, "Is South African Transformation Dead?" David Thomas reminds us of what Istwalande Nelson Mandela said to business leaders on 23 May 1990, that if we are genuinely interested in ending the old social order and bringing in a new order characterized by notions of justice and equity, it is obvious that the economic power relations represented by the reality of the excessive concentration of power in a few white hands have to change. We make this demand not as a result of any imperative that might be said to drive from ideological conviction. We make it because we cannot see how it would be possible to pull our country out of the economic crisis, in part caused and exemplified by wide control of economic power, whilst at the same time, we perpetuate this power. One of these imperatives is to end white domination in all its forms, to de-racialize the exercise of economic power, close quote. Madiba's clarion call placed before South Africans an inevitable path of economic transformation agenda, which remains relevant in today's economic landscape. From the program director, in the South African context, concentration is of particular concern because it is generally not associated with efficient forms of growing concentration, but rather inefficient forms. The preamble to the Competition Act begins by recognizing that apartheid had left the country with an economy characterized by excessive levels of concentration of ownership and control, as well as lack of participation by all South Africans. The apartheid regime actively promoted national champions in different sectors, developed industrial state-owned enterprise, monopolies, and agricultural cooperatives that were later privatized, and condoned industry cartels in its efforts to promote self-sufficiency and the economic interests of a minority. Whilst the conglomerates were generally unbundled in the initial post-apartheid period, selling off non-core businesses, the individual businesses that were dominating particular industries often remained intact. The Commission previously did a study that attempted to look at concentration, looking at its own major data. And it did confirm that the economy remained concentrated 15 years since the Act was promulgated. This is in spite of substantial growth in the economy over this period, which could have promoted a greater spread of ownership. That research, thankfully, Minister, was the foundation of the amendments to the Act, which were promulgated in 2019. Following the amendments, this study seeks to deepen our understanding of patterns of concentration and participation in the South African economy. And different from what we did a few years ago with our own major data. This study does this through a detailed assessment of both the levels and trends in concentration and participation over the past 5 to 10 years across 178 industries, which is much wider than what we did before. The study has sought to provide measures at a detailed subsector level and across the various layers of the value chain for all major sectors of the economy. This has been achieved through the assistance of more than 80 industry bodies, regulatory bodies, and government departments that collect data on the economy as part of their duties. So it goes beyond just our own data. The study's detailed sectoral analysis is complemented by national data sets to provide broader insights around the level of concentration at a broader sectoral level, the distribution of firm income across firm sizes, the level and trend in the participation of small and medium enterprises, the evolving entry and exit of firms across firm size categories, and the transitioning between firm size categories. Specifically, the study has made use of the administrative tax data based on the South African Revenue Services database. We would like to thank industry role players, organized business, regulatory bodies, and government departments for sharing credible data and insights during the course of this important exercise. Members of the media, by using data sources that are consistently collected by organizations and government, the study is able to consistently examine trends and not just levels of concentration. This is important as it provides insights into the trajectory of different markets. It also means that the study can be updated in future to continue tracking those trends and provide a useful series. The main study itself is lengthy at over 400 pages. For this reason, there is also a summary report that we will share with you, which seeks to highlight some overall insights across the multiple markets that are studied, as well as quick takeaways for individual markets. The main findings of the study will be outlined by the chief economist, James Hodge, who has been introduced. And I would like to take the opportunity, Minister, to really thank James and the team for undertaking this comprehensive research on behalf of the Commission. I say it without a doubt that without James's leadership of this project, I am doubtful that we would have been able to undertake work of this magnitude. Program Director, I will in a moment invite James to share with us detailed findings and recommendations of this report. But before I do so, I also do want to sincerely thank Minister Patel for placing competition policy at the center of government policy in South Africa today. So what we see, Minister, across the world with economic challenges and challenges of industrialization that face not just the developing world, but also Europe, especially in the context of digital markets, that competition policy often becomes a victim because many cannot see its immediate benefits in this quest for growth and industrialization. And so we are really grateful that in South Africa, you seek to balance all of these policy instruments. And it really gives us a chance as competition authorities to show what we can do. And we hope that through this study, we will make a lasting contribution to the understanding of competition in South Africa, and more particularly, understanding our markets, the participation of small and medium enterprises, the participation of historically disadvantaged persons, as well as the trends in concentration over time. So I thank you very much for affording us such an opportunity and to present this within Cabinet. We will update this report biannually in order to track the trends in the market concentration and participation, in order to inform our work and hopefully to also help with government priorities and policies. Thanks very much. May I now ask James to give more details on the study.
Thank you, Commissioner, Honourable Minister, and members of the media. As the Commissioner indicated, the report goes to over 400 pages, but there is a summary report. And I'm just going to highlight some of the cross-sectoral and cross-market aspects that we've highlighted in that summary report. So the first is that there is a persistence of high concentration, as we confirmed with our earlier study. Markets were deemed to be highly concentrated if 3 firms had more than a 50% share of the total revenue in that sector, and highly concentrated with a dominant firm if a single firm also held more than 35%. So the study found that 40% of the markets that we looked at were highly concentrated with a dominant firm, and a further 29%, so in total 69% of markets were highly concentrated. 21% of these markets were moderately concentrated and only 10% were unconcentrated. So these findings do confirm the earlier findings of the need for the recent amendments to the Act in order to address persistent concentration in the economy. The markets that were identified as highly concentrated, just to illustrate, a large number came from farming inputs, your seeds, seed treatment, fertilizer, storage, animal feed, fungicides, insecticides, your agro-processing, such as grain, fisheries, ostrich, bread, poultry, sugar, the so-called sin industries, alcohol, gambling, and cigarettes, healthcare, medical schemes, administration, pathology, hospitals, and pharmacy, communications, your mobile, fiber to the home, publishing and broadcasting, your upstream steel value chains from the mining and steel production, and your chemicals as well. Transport sector in terms of airlines and vehicles, and finance in terms of all aspects of insurance and banking. The second major finding is that highly concentrated markets were becoming more concentrated over time, the kind of inefficient concentration that the Commissioner highlighted. So what we found was that tracking over a period of 5 to 10 years, that highly concentrated markets with a dominant firm were 3 times more likely to have seen increases in concentration over that period than reductions in concentration. And this is in stark contrast to unconcentrated or moderately concentrated markets, where there is a greater likelihood that they become less concentrated over time. This finding is also consistent with the notion that dominant firms are more capable of raising entry barriers and excluding rivals, which may reinforce their dominance over time. And whilst it confirms the need to focus enforcement on markets with dominant firms, it also suggests that we need proactive measures to ensure that markets do not become concentrated in the first place. In this regard, the study does also note that there's growing concentration in government licensed sectors such as fisheries, retail pharmacy, renewable energy, and gambling. And there may be more scope to actually address this through changes in the regulatory regime and the licensing regime in these markets. The third major finding is that growing participation in the economy by SMEs remains a considerable challenge in South Africa. We made use of the SARS administrative tax database for all tax-paying firms in the economy, and we found that whilst SMEs represented 95% of firms, they only represented 24% of firm revenue in the economy. Where they did contribute disproportionately was to employment creation, with a 38% share of employment. But these figures are in stark contrast to the OECD average, where small businesses constitute 99% of firms, but more importantly, over 50 to 60% of value add in the economy. So in South Africa, it is half that amount. And this comparison highlights the extent to which participation remains a considerable challenge in the economy. The SARS data over time also shows that SMEs not only suffer from quite high exit rates, even by global standards, but that the exit rates have been increasing over the last 10 years. Even though there's some promising developments around medium firms growing into larger ones. If we look at a more granular level and the data we collected from industry organizations and regulators, then the study found that 48% of the markets had fewer than 20 firms or participants, and 75% of the markets we looked at had fewer than 100 participants. And concerning in this respect is the trend that only 24% of these markets were seeing growing participation levels. Predictably, highly concentrated sectors tend to have fewer participants, but the study also found that there were many highly concentrated sectors where there existed a sizable number of firms that held a small share and just seemed unable to scale and challenge the incumbents. So this does again confirm the need to focus on participation in the economy as per the amendments, and also the removal of barriers to expansion, not just entry, in order to create a stronger competition regime in the country. This would include work that's being done through enforcement, through market inquiries, and also broader economic policy. The fourth area is that there's a high degree of inequality in the distribution of firm income, which naturally stems from the low levels of SME participation. But again, using the SARS database, the study was able to determine the actual distribution of firm income, much like we look at the distribution of household income. The study found that it is highly inequitable, with the top 10% of firms holding over 86% of total turnover, whilst the bottom 50% held only 1.6% of total turnover. And this has barely changed over time. There are some exceptions, such as in catering and accommodation or personal services, but there are also many sectors where we would expect a much stronger showing from smaller firms, but that's not the case. So this might be in retail, motor trade, wholesale, and agriculture, which have similar levels of concentration as others. The study did calculate a Gini coefficient, which is the typical measure used to measure income inequality in households, and that came in at 0.84 for distribution of firm income, which is considerably higher than the 0.63 we have for households. So this does highlight, I think, quite well the high degree of inequality in the commercial side of the economy. The fifth area, and moving to more of a sectoral focus, the food value chain showed particularly concerning levels and trends in concentration. The study found that there's a high level of concentration for inputs, and I'd indicated earlier that inputs featured strongly amongst the highly concentrated sectors, but also on the processing side. But to give you some illustration on the input side, the top 3 firms in seed treatment, fungicides, animal genetics, fertilizer, and forestry control anywhere between 60 and 90% of all inputs. So that's just 3 firms. At the other end of the value chain and the processors, the top 3 processors for dairy, sugar, and grains control anywhere from 50 to 80% of processing. And even where there is small participation, such as in milling, the top 3 firms still control a very high share. What this appears to us is that the concentration of inputs and processing may have placed small and emerging farmers in a margin squeeze through high or discriminatory pricing for inputs, coupled with lower prices for their outputs. And that outcome means that farmers and growers need to get large or get out of this industry, which appears to be happening at an alarming rate. So the study found that there's been a sharp decline in the number of commercial farming units over the past 5 years, even though output has continued to grow, which shows that farms are getting considerably larger and small farms are exiting. So the study found that 24% of grain farming units were reduced over this period. There was a reduction of 31% in dairy farming units, 56% in commercial cattle, and 24% in commercial pig farming. And the reason we've highlighted this particular concern is that the market structure is clearly adverse to small growers, and this is likely to undermine land reform initiatives aimed at growing the share of Black emerging farmers in the country. Furthermore, the market structure also undermines the potential for greater job creation and participation by small firms within agriculture. And this is an area where we hold a comparative advantage and where there is scope for growth, because large firms...
All right, we're going to come out of that Competition Commission briefing and go straight to Parliament.